From the moment he stepped onto his first soundstage until the day he walked off his last, Elvis Presley created a motion picture legacy that will never be forgotten. Between 1956 and 1969, he starred in 32 films. Some good,
Now you know what I do for an encore.
some, well,
I'm the Sheik of Araby.
Elvis's Hollywood years parallel the milestones in his private life. Sometimes what went on behind the scenes was more interesting than what was captured on celluloid, because the real Elvis Presley was a lot more compelling than the two and sometimes one-dimensional characters he played on the big screen.
Oh, shut up.
Unfortunately, Presley's enormous success at the box office only hampered his hopes of becoming a respected dramatic actor. And that is the dark side of Elvis's Hollywood years, a story that began with infinite possibilities nearly half a century ago.
Well, we're going to get things started out with a young man who is making his 6th appearance on stage shows. He's that dynamic singer of songs who incidentally leaves for Hollywood tonight for a screen test. We wish him a lot of luck. Here he is, Elvis Presley.
By the spring of 1956, Elvis's television appearances and record sales had catapulted him from total obscurity to national superstardom. So it was no surprise when Elvis left for Tinseltown to take his shot at the silver screen.
First of all, you get a hit record, and you go on television, and then you go to Hollywood. That's how it happens. So I went to Hollywood, and I wasn't ready for that town, and they wasn't ready for me, you know. So it's all new to me. I was like 19 or 20 years old, so.
When Elvis was in Memphis before he went out to Hollywood, he studied Hollywood in his own way. He would go see movies day in and day out. He'd watch movies. He'd go to the movie theaters, and he'd watch movie after movie. He was an usher in a movie theater. He got to see motion pictures over and over, and he studied. He did his homework. He noticed that Clark Gable wore his shirt open, didn't wear an undershirt. He copied that. He noticed that Brando and Jimmy Dean and Tony Curtis and those guys had dark hair, and they didn't do a lot of smiling. And actually that worked for him, because when he got to Hollywood, if you'll notice, all of his early publicity pictures, he's not smiling. Because he said he felt that the guys who smiled a whole lot and had that typical Hollywood blonde hair, blue eyes, smile look actually faded out quicker than the guys who had the demeanor of a Brando or a Jimmy Dean.
If you come into a place, there's nobody there to meet you, you start wondering, you know.
Surely.
Very nice talking to you, sir. We're going to have to run.
All right, thank you very much.
Elvis arrived in Hollywood and went straight to Paramount Studios, where he met with legendary producer Hal Wallace, who had arranged for a screen test. It was the beginning of a very productive relationship.
I remember the day Elvis Presley first walked on this lot, his first motion picture set, and he was already very well established. And one of our most prominent producers was Hal Wallace, and he saw in Elvis Presley the same thing he saw in Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston and the other famous people that he had found. He saw a big movie star, and he brought him here on the lot.
The first half of the screen test featured Elvis lip-syncing blue suede shoes while strumming a stringless prop guitar.
That sound ready? All ready. Let's make a take. Come on. Turn them over. Speed. Action.
So one for the money, two for the show. Three to get ready. Now go, cat, go. Thing with the home for my blue suede shoes.
Cut. Fine. Great.
The second half was a dramatic scene from The Rainmaker, which was slated to be Presley's movie debut. These rare photographs are all that survive of the long-lost Rainmaker screen test.
I was asked by Hal Wallace to come and see a screen test that he had made of a young man named Elvis Presley. And I had heard of Elvis Presley, but I had never seen him work. And I had great trepidation about seeing that, because I didn't think that, from what I had known of Elvis, that he was screen material. I thought he was a passing fancy for young children, especially young girls. But I was very pleasantly surprised. As a matter of fact, my socks were knocked off seeing what I saw on the screen.
Wallace was equally impressed, and after some tough negotiations with Colonel Parker, signed Elvis to a 7-year contract.
Colonel Parker knew about Hal Wallace, knew of his background, knew of the great things he'd done for so many stars and the variety of pictures he had made. Also, Hal Wallace, the producer, knew the importance of keeping Colonel Parker, as you say, in the loop of what was happening, because Colonel Parker really controlled Elvis. So there was a happy marriage between Hal Wallace and Colonel Parker.
Elvis, you made a screen test. Can you tell us the result of that now?
Yeah, we got a 7-year contract with Paramount Pictures. We'll have a movie coming out, I don't know when, but we started making it in June. It's a movie with Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn called The Rainmaker.
Wallace put The Rainmaker into production, but with one minor change in the casting. As planned, Burt Lancaster and Katharine Hepburn starred in the colorful drama. But in the role that had been intended for Elvis, Hal Wallace cast newcomer Earl Holliman.
I was offered a part in The Rainmaker.
I see. Quite a dramatic bit, isn't it?
Well, it was, but it wasn't the character in it. I didn't feel I could do it the way that it should be done.
The real reason Elvis dropped out was that the part of Hepburn's kid brother was just too small for the film debut of Elvis Presley.
Without having to trick him.
If Elvis had done The Rainmaker and had done okay in the film, he might have gradually worked his way up to other parts. Who knows?
After The Rainmaker fell through, Hal Wallace set about trying to find a script worthy of the king. Unable to find a suitable project at Paramount, Wallace loaned Elvis to 20th Century Fox for a Civil War drama entitled The Reno Brothers, co-starring Richard Egan, Deborah Paget, and William Campbell.
One day I received a call. They asked me to go up to a certain projection room at 20th Century Fox. They were showing wardrobe of different people, including Deborah Paget. When this beautiful girl's picture came up on the screen, I heard somebody behind me, and I suddenly realized it was Elvis, say, "Golly, boy, is she a looker." He says, "Am I gonna kiss her?" And I hear Parker, the colonel, say, "Yeah, I think so, a couple of times." He says, "I can't wait." Finally, the lights went up. Richard Egan and myself were chatting, and all of a sudden I get a touch on my shoulder, and I turn around and it's Elvis. He said, "Mr. Campbell." He says, "Could I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." He says, "You know, this is the first time I ever did any acting. I want to do a good job in my first picture." He said, "I was wondering if you'd help me out." I said, "What do you mean, help you out?" "Elvis." I said, "They're going to photograph you up, down, over, under, left, right." I said, "You're going to look like one of the best actors in America."
Presley as Clint Reno.
And Elvis was doing very well, I thought, for what he was given. This was not, this wasn't the greatest dialogue in the world. It was a pretty pedestrian film in the sense that it was a typical Western kind of motif, the bad guy, the good guy, the morality play, and all that good stuff.
The film was intended as a straight drama without songs.
Say you want your lover. Say you ain't laid awake every night by my side thinking of him. Wishing I was Vance. Wishing you'd waited for him and never married me.
Presley was clearly excited about making a serious picture.
It's a dramatic picture. It's a love story, but it's not Western.
Who are the stars?
Opposite of you, Al. Deborah Paget and Richard Egan. It's a very good cast, and they have a lot of the big stars in the supporting cast.
When Elvis was first signed to the Reno Brothers, a Confederate love story, it was a straight Western, and he was really looking forward to appearing in a straight role, not non-singing. That was a big deal to him. But again, the studio paid for Elvis Presley, and pretty soon a few songs worked their way into the screenplay. The next thing you know, he's rocking and rolling out on the front porch of a Confederate homestead. It was kind of goofy.
They call me poor boy, poor boy, poor boy.
4 songs were added, including a tune that became an instant classic and the film's new title.
Tell me you are mine.
Since the picture now had musical numbers, it was Campbell's turn to get advice from Elvis.
Bobby Webb, the director, came over and he said, Bill, he said, I want you to bone up on that number that Elvis sings on the porch. I went into orbit. I said, I wasn't hired to sing with Elvis or anybody else. I said, I'm not a singer. And I'm sitting there looking at the sheet music, and Elvis was watching this. And I had said a couple of times, I'm sorry, Elvis, the way I feel. And when it was over, he came over laughing, and he said, Bill, he says, what I'm going to do every day, when we have some time, we'll come in here, and we'll go through it, and I'll choreograph this out with you. All I had to do was clap my hands and go boom, 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 but nobody else had anything else to do. And I did it, and I was still embarrassed, but years and years later, of course, I'm very proud of that moment, you know, being the first one to actually do that with him. We were shooting on the back lot. I will never forget this. And he had his musicians there, and we all ate out there. And Elvis sees all these kids there. And it was supposed to be, if you remember, it was supposed to be like a county fair type thing we were at. And Elvis took his guitar and jumped on the stage, and his musicians, it had been set up, they jumped up there, and he gave up his lunch to play for the people and for the kids. He had a great humanity, you know, it was really something. And he did not have a typical ego. I got to the point where I loved him. And it really worried me. And I thought to myself, when Parker came to me, he said, I'd like you to travel with Elvis. I said, what do you mean, travel with Elvis? I would like you to be his companion. Watch over him. I said, what are you talking? I've got a career. He says, I promise you in every picture you will have the second lead. And I said, look, Colonel, I appreciate it. And I know that I'd make myself a bundle of bucks. But I said, I can't do it. I've got my own career. Don't you understand?
You just finished a picture with Elvis Presley.
Yes, and Richard Egan. It's called Love Me Tender.
How'd you like working with this man, Elvis Presley?
Oh, very much, Dave. He's a very nice person. He's very cooperative and friendly.
Where are you off to now in your bejeweled chariot?
I'm on my way home for a party I'm giving for the cast and crew of the picture.
On November 16, 1956, Love Me Tender premiered at the Paramount Theater in New York. Thousands of screaming fans showed up to celebrate Elvis's motion picture debut, a publicity stunt arranged by Colonel Parker. Love Me Tender earned back its $1 million production cost in just 3 days. Elvis's status as a box office champ was established with his very first film. But reviews were as mixed as the audience's reaction to the ending.
I remember seeing Love Me Tender, and it was really hysterical because when Elvis dies at the end, all the males in the audience cheered and all the girls were crying. There was a real schism between the Elvis Presley fanatics.
I did not like Love Me Tender because he died in it, and I didn't want him to die. I wanted Deborah Paget to fall in love with him, and I wanted him to end up with a girl, and it didn't happen, so it was sad.
The film also made an impression on a couple of future rockers.
Morrison was a big fan of Love Me Tender. Elvis was great in his very first movie. You got to see the man raw and real. And for me, also Love Me Tender. I say for both of us, it's Love Me Tender.
By now, Paramount had found a project for Presley, which began production in January of 1957. As with Love Me Tender, the title tune became a big hit. Loving You was written and directed by Hollywood veteran Hal Cantor.
Hal Wallace sent me to Memphis, Tennessee to meet Elvis in person and to talk about the show, but also to see him in action and to learn as much about his method of operation as I possibly could, and eventually to incorporate some of what I had learned in the film itself, because I had not only written the screenplay, I was now to direct it.
Elvis found Hal Cantor to be the sort of person who would give you the shirt off his back, literally.
I was wearing a black velour shirt that my wife had given me just before I left to go to Memphis. And Elvis admired the shirt. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Do you like it?" He said, "Oh yeah, I like it very much." I said, "Have you got another shirt? I'll give you this one." He couldn't believe that I had given him that shirt. He was so proud of that black velour shirt. When he showed up in Hollywood several weeks later to start rehearsing the show, he was wearing that shirt. And I said to him, "That's a good-looking shirt you're wearing there, Elvis." I said, "Where'd you get that?" He said, "Oh, some fan gave it to me." I said, "Okay."
You don't care about me or Tex or anybody, just yourself.
You've got 15 minutes to get on that stage and find out if you've even got a future.
He was opposite a lovely young lady that Hal Wallace had found, and it was under contract to us here at Paramount, Dolores Hart. They did 2 pictures together, his first picture and his second picture together. And you could tell on the screen and on the set the adulation and the respect and perhaps love that they had for each other. She left our business, became a nun, and she's now, I think, a Mother Superior.
The Loving You storyline was loosely based on Elvis's own experiences with fame, fortune, and controversy.
Loving You was the essence of a great rock and roll movie. I mean, he played this character, Deke Rivers, this poor kid who works his way up through rock and roll and then gets attacked for being too overtly sexual on stage, and then he goes on national TV to defend himself, and then does the most overtly sexual number you've ever seen on camera. I mean, full bump and grind, running up and down the aisles. I mean, it was just amazing to watch.
Loving You also gave Elvis's backup band a chance to appear on camera.
He said, "You guys want to do the movies too?" We said, "Well, yeah, I guess we can do 1 or 2 and see what happens." And so we did Loving You, which was, well, I thought was a good movie. I thought we had good material there.
As with Love Me Tender, the film made quite an impression on another budding young rocker.
Loving You is amazing. Just the way he was dressed, the bandana around his neck, and just so memorable.
Once again, the film was a huge success. Once again, reviews were mixed, with Elvis his own worst critic.
How do you rate yourself as an actor?
Pretty bad. I mean, that's something you learn through experience. I think that maybe I might accomplish something at it through the years.
You think it's just the sake of acting natural? Don't you do that? In your last 2 pictures, I'd say you have.
In some scenes, I was pretty natural. In others, I was trying to act. And when you start trying to act, you're dead.
How did you find Hal Wallace as the producer-director?
He's a very, very, very fine gentleman.
Did he help you out, or who was the big help and aid in your show, Loving You?
Well, there's nobody who helps you out. They have a director and a producer. And as far as the acting and as far as singing and all, you're on your own.
They predict that Elvis Presley will be another James Dean. Now, have you heard that?
I've heard something about it, but I would never compare myself in any way to James Dean, because James Dean was a genius in acting.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'll say that I sure would like to. I mean, I guess there's a lot of actors in Hollywood that would like to have had the ability that James Dean had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I would never compare myself with James Dean in any way.
The Presley-Dean comparison was dismissed by Hal Wallace, who said, "We did not sign Elvis as a second Jimmy Dean. We signed him as a #1 Elvis Presley." Wallace wasn't the only one of his generation to appreciate Elvis's considerable gifts. More and more of the studio brass were starting to admire Presley's talents.
He was a very unique talent. I had completely misjudged him at first. I think most people my age misjudged him.
The older people who were in the business then were
had their opinions set already, that this was something that was very questionable. Remembering what era that was, that, well, isn't this the kid who moves his hips funny and isn't it vulgar? And he disarmed him so fast because he was very pleasant to work with. It is absolutely flatly true that there was never a guy who worked with him that didn't like him. You know, he'd hit makeup in the morning. He'd start with getting coffee for the hairdresser, then he'd get coffee for the makeup man, then he'd get coffee for himself. That goes a long way in this business.
Elvis Presley was one among equals on the set, one among equals. It was just, he wasn't above anybody, he was there. And the people had that feeling. And he was so professional. God, he was so professional.
He was there every morning at 9 o'clock on the butt. He was never late. He knew his lines, and the funny part about it was he knew the other people's lines too, because he had that photographic memory, you know. And he was real good with his lines, very cooperative, didn't argue with anybody, because he was trying to let it be known in Hollywood he wanted to be a serious actor. He wasn't out there just fooling around trying to make a rock and roll movie, or so he wanted to learn the trade and become a part of that Hollywood movie situation.
To make the best of that situation, Elvis tried to make the movie set feel more like home.
We would usually go into the set, and he would go in and sit down at the piano and start singing spirituals. This is the way that he got in the mood. This is the way he relaxed. It just took that for him to relax and to feel at home and to feel at ease with the people around him. And this is what he had to have to be himself.
Being himself also involved a little fun and games during those long periods of downtime.
One day I'm going to lunch, and as I'm walking into the commissary door, coming around the corner is this tall fellow with a pompadour and sideburns and a red shirt and jeans and white bucks. And I thought, wow, this is a mighty looking fella. Had no idea who he was. Looked kind of familiar. And as we walk in together, the place is packed. And a lot of people were looking over at him. I didn't know it was because of the sideburns or they knew who he was. Make a long story short, we finished lunch. And he said, "You want to have some fun?" Why not? You know, I'm a 17-year-old kid. Why not have some fun? All the sound stages have these metal ladders bolted to the top of the sound stages. And he just heads on up. And he says, "Come on." And I follow him up to the top. He reaches in his pocket and he pulls out balloons. He's got all these balloons. So we go ahead and we fill them up and we start tossing them, and then look down and people are jumping and bouncing and we're backing up, and it's like two 10-year-old kids. We are laughing. He's laughing so hard he's literally rolling on the tar paper on the roof in hysterics. Then he goes ahead and he's got this big one, and Poppy lets it go, and he bounces back and says, "I gotta go. I just wound up hitting my producer, Hal Wallace, on the head. I'm in trouble."
By the spring of 1957, Elvis's schedule was so jam-packed with concerts, recording sessions, and movie making, he barely had time to move into his new mansion, Graceland, before returning to Hollywood for his next picture, this time at prestigious MGM.
Being in radio and television in Memphis and dreaming about Hollywood and hearing about those big sound stages and driving through the gates of MGM and all of the fantastic things you heard about in movie studios, MGM was the top of the line at that time. It was the biggest studio in Hollywood, the most famous studio in Hollywood. And as we drove through the studios that first day, I'll never forget it. We were in that limousine, and the gate guard was a guy named Kenny Hollywood.
I got a call that there was a commotion at the Dahlberg Gate at the front of MGM over in Culver City. And it said that Elvis Presley is coming in, and we're just overwhelmed with female workers who are trying to get at the car and everything else. And I said, "Well, take the kids and chase them away. You're a policeman." And it's, "No, you don't understand. It's not kids. It's middle-aged and elderly women who come out of the executive building."
The studio's first order of business was selecting songs from the various tracks Elvis had recorded for his new film, tentatively titled Jailhouse Kid.
The producer, Pan Berman, says, "Alex, what number of the 10 you've heard has the most production value? And I said, well, there's only one, Jailhouse Rock. And he said, oh, no, we can't use that. That goes over the titles. And I said, the titles? And he said, yes. And I said, you're wasting a great number. I said, I don't mean to be bragging, but that's a show-stopping number.
But some believe it was Elvis himself who did the choreography.
Watch him dance in Jailhouse Rock. You know, Elvis choreographed that routine in Jailhouse Rock. So the man, the man was a dancer.
So did Elvis or Alex do the choreography? The truth is somewhere in between.
When Alex Romero, who was the choreographer of Jailhouse Rock, first presented the dance sequence for Jailhouse Rock, Elvis shook his head. He said, "That's not me. I can't do that, Alex. I appreciate what you've done here." He wanted Elvis to do more of a Gene Nelson, Fred Astaire type. Elvis said, "It's not me. I'll try it." And Elvis, being the cooperative guy, he got up and tried. He said, "See, Alex, it's not me." And then that's when Alex said, "Elvis, I tell you what, let me incorporate your stage act into what I want to do, and let's see if that'll work." And he went home that night, came back the next day, and he had taken Elvis's stage act and incorporated that into a dance sequence. Elvis said, "Hey, I can do that. That's me." And in one take, right there in the rehearsal hall at MGM, Elvis had it down. And then, of course, it became historic in being Elvis's best dance sequence in a motion picture.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint.
The sequence was way ahead of its time and would serve as the prototype for what would later be called the music video. Presley's enthusiasm while rehearsing the Jailhouse Rock number led to a potentially catastrophic health scare.
In those days, you did musical pieces that are pure music. You do them ahead of time in pre-production. And that number, Jailhouse Rock, we did do in pre-production. And we were up on stage 27. And Elvis came over and said, Dr. What's-his-name, the dentist, the lot dentist, is making me a cap. And he said, he put a temporary on while it's being manufactured. I said, yeah. And he said, well, it just came off while I was swinging. And listen to me, this is just neat. And he went, and there was a whistling sound.
Everybody.
The damn thing was in him, it was in his lung. So they had a procedure which was a little frightening, where they put him out and then take an instrument and go and get it. So about now, Colonel Parker arrived, and if I've ever seen a man close to a coronary, it was when the doctor was saying, well, no, Colonel, there's nothing to worry about. See, we took this instrument we have, and we just spread the vocal cords, and we go between that right down, and Parker's face was ashen, and he said, but we got hold of it, and then it broke. So now we had two pieces. So we just spread it some more, and of course you could see a whole career passing by.
The classic title song has added significance for one of Elvis's friends.
I remember coming home from that movie, and it was very late at night, and there was this little drizzle out, and Jailhouse Rock came on the radio. And I remember Elvis stopped the car, got out of the car, it was on Fountain Avenue, and he danced the whole scene he did in the movie in the middle of the street on Fountain Avenue. And I kept thinking, if people woke up right now and looked out their windows, they'd see Elvis Presley dancing in the streets like Gene Kelly.
No, Vince, let's try it again. Vince!
As with Loving You, Jailhouse Rock drew from Elvis's real life, only this time it was about an ex-con who makes it big in Hollywood.
How do you like our movie star, Peggy?
He has adapted very quickly.
Well, there's not much oxygen up where he is, and the man gets lightheaded. There comes a time when you got to take a hand in things, and that time is now. Don't push me. I'm gonna beat hell out of you. Don't try. You're talking crazy, man. You know you got it coming, son. I said don't try.
Jailhouse Rock is also the love story of this rebel.
How dare you think such cheap tactics would work with me?
Any tactics, honey? It's just the beast in me.
Shortly after filming was completed, Elvis received some tragic news.
We just finished completion of the shooting of Jailhouse Rock. We've been home about a week, and Elvis comes knocking on my door early in the morning. my mom says, it's Elvis. And I go to this, Elvis, what's up? He said, come on, get in the car. I said, what? So I threw on some clothes and jumped in the car. I said, what's wrong? He said, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, Elvis, what happened? He said, Judy Tyler just got killed in an automobile accident. I said, what? Judy Tyler was his co-star in Jailhouse Rock. It was her big break. This was her chance to really make a name for herself in Hollywood, you know, opposite Elvis Presley, big motion picture and everything. I said, Elvis, what happened? He said, well, she and her husband were driving home and back to where they lived. I don't know whether it's Utah or wherever, and they were in a fatal accident and they both got killed. And I said, oh, wow. He was really upset. It was one of the times that I really saw Elvis upset, and he was really seriously down and out. And we drove around for about 3 hours. I'm not saying too much either, just driving around Memphis and driving around. And finally, we would reminisce about something that happened on the movie set with her, or tell a little story about her, or recall an incident with her in the motion picture, and we just couldn't. So this was Elvis's way of accepting it, and we drove around Memphis, as I said, for about 3 or 4 hours, and he was really depressed that she'd passed away.
Jailhouse Rock is the astounding success story of this rebel with a voice that rocked the world.
Jailhouse Rock was a box office smash when it opened in October of 1957, but opinions can change over the years.
I love Jailhouse Rock. I mean, if I'm going to pick one that I saw it on television the other night, and it was so bad, those things become camp now when you look back on them. You know?
Everybody in the wholesale block.
Equally campy was the promotional trailer used to attract young moviegoers.
Well, what's the verdict, kids? Another hit for Elvis?
I don't say.
Oh, yes.
That's the title song of Elvis's newest picture, Jailhouse Rock. In it, he sings 6 different songs. 6?
Gosh.
And something else very special.
Oh, what's that, Ted?
Elvis acts in Jailhouse Rock. His first dramatic singing role. Plays sort of a blackboard jungle type of kid, you know, and he's terrific. Elvis sings, Elvis fights, Elvis dances, and Elvis falls in love. This picture, Jailhouse Rock's a terrific picture for teenagers, and it's wonderful, too.
Elvis was now the 4th-ranked box office star in Hollywood. As 1958 began, so too did production on Elvis's next picture, which was shot in New Orleans.
So it's gone, 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 jumping like a catfish on a...
Although many would consider it Presley's finest film, the project was not intended for Elvis.
King Creole was being prepped for James Dean, and it was based on a book by Harold Robbins called A Stone for Danny Fisher. James Dean got killed. It was about a fighter, and they changed it to a singer and put Elvis in it.
The director was Michael Curtiz, who had teamed with Hal Wallace to create such classics as The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, Yankee Doodle Dandy with James Cagney, and Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart. Could they work that same magic on a picture with Elvis Presley?
Ronnie, what are you doing here with this man? How'd you get into this?
How do you get out? He was so good in it. He was very good in it. I think everyone was shocked. I think Walter Matthau and Paul Stewart and Dean Jagger and all the old hands were shocked at how good he was.
Now he crowns his meteoric rise to fame with a fiery burst of dramatic power as hard-loving, hard-hitting Danny Fisher, who sang his way up from the gutters of lusty, brawling New Orleans.
I was amazed at Elvis's talent. He had a great sense of timing. He was so normal, so real, so natural, and he amazed me. And he went with whatever you did. He would just fall right into it. He was wonderful.
Elvis's favorite movie that I ever knew about when I was dating him was King Creole. And he liked it because the storyline was good. And he liked it because the actors were serious actors that he was playing with or working with. And he would like to do more pictures like that, more dramatic pictures.
Audiences were finally given a chance to see what Elvis could do with a first-rate cast and script.
Michael Curtiz was Hungarian, and he had this thick accent. And I don't know if he ever really understood the English language, but he understood the camera and what to do, and his pictures were wonderful. And when I heard that Michael Curtiz was going to do a picture with Elvis, someone said, he's not, but you know, how do they get along? I said, Michael Curtiz can do anything with anyone and do it well.
He was sitting on a chair attached to a huge boom that went up and hovered over the whole dime store set. He had a big horn that he screamed at people through. And he wasn't being incredibly sensitive, because if he wanted somebody to move, he'd scream, "Little old lady, move out of the way! Get out of the way, you little old lady!"
Michael Curtiz, he didn't want Elvis for that movie in the beginning, and then he fell in love with Elvis, and I never will forget, at the end of the movie, Elvis went up to Michael Curtiz, this was his 4th movie, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Curtiz. Now I know what a director is."
You're a pretty fancy performer, ain't you, kid?
Now you know what I do for an encore.
King Creole was a serious picture. It wasn't like some of the others we did on the beach at Hawaii and getting in on a surfboard, and you know, those pictures did not have the depth, I think, that King Creole had.
And we ran it here at the studio, and I saw Elvis a couple days later and told him I'd seen the picture, and I said, "Elvis, this is the best thing you have done. It's wonderful." He said, "You know why I was so good at it?" "Why?" He said, "Because I was hiding. I was hiding behind the makeup of being someone else."
My heart is filled with your...
But Elvis would have to put his promising motion picture career on hold. Shortly before filming began on King Creole, he received a letter informing him that his attendance was requested in the United States Army.
King Creole was coming up right after the holidays down in New Orleans, so Colonel Parker and his people got together with the U.S. government and the draft board and all. And at that time, since there was no war going on, the United States would give you time to clear up your business if you had a project going on. So they gave him a deferment to make King Creole, and he went down and he made King Creole, and he wasn't very happy that he was being drafted, because here you are making millions of dollars, the biggest star in the world, living in Graceland, living in mansions, living in penthouses and suites in Beverly Hills, and making motion pictures, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in the United States Army, a dog-faced soldier. Elvis was patriotic and all, but you know, the truth be known, he wasn't very happy that he had to go in the Army.
King Creole premiered in July of 1958 and was another smash hit. After suffering a critical drubbing for his first 3 films, Elvis got the best reviews he had ever or would ever receive. As the Los Angeles Times put it, well, for heaven's sake, Elvis Presley is turning into an actor.
It's gotten so I look longer at a dame with clothes on and one without. I'm not a hoodlum, but I am a hustler. I've had to be for a very simple reason.
Just when audiences were beginning to see Elvis's real potential as a dramatic actor, he had to drop everything so he could serve his country.
While he's in the military, a lot of things happen to society, a lot of things happen to Hollywood, and things can't be the same when he gets back.
While Elvis was away, a lot of other teenage idols arose. You know, they couldn't fill his place, but little girls needed another hero. But when he came back, he took over all over again. Didn't wipe out the scene, all the other people continued, but Elvis was back and the king had returned.
In March of 1960, Sergeant Elvis Presley was discharged from the Army. His first order of business was holding a press conference to announce his plans and hopes.
I'd like to do a little more of a serious role, you know, because my ambition is to progress as an actor, you know, which takes a long time, a lot of experience, because I have 3 pictures in a row to do, you know. I hope there won't be a rock and roll picture, because I've made 4 already. You can only get away with that for so long.
The rock and roll idol of millions is back on the scene. He's also newly interested in becoming a serious actor. The Army's loss may be the drama's gain. Who knows?
I've heard stories that Elvis they wanted him for the movie West Side Story, and Colonel Parker said, no, he's not playing a hoodlum. You know, they wanted him for Tony. They wanted Elvis for the lead. Can you imagine the part of Tony, the Richard Beamer part, Elvis doing that? And the colonel said, no, that's a hoodlum. Those are gangs. We don't want Elvis associated with gangs. He's got enough of a hoodlum reputation, you know? We don't want him to be a hoodlum with the greasy hair and all of that. No way. Zip guns? No, Elvis is not a juvenile delinquent. He's not a hoodlum. He's a good decent, wholesome American entertainer who's going to give you a roustabout.
Wherever Elvis went, he was welcomed as a returning hero, including at his old stomping grounds, Paramount Studios.
The first day on the set was really different for me, but for Elvis, he was thrilled. You could see he had a big smile on his face. Everybody was welcoming him on the lot, craft people, all the grips and the assistant directors. They're all thrilled to see Elvis back at the studio.
But if Elvis expected Paramount to present him with a dramatic, non-musical film, he had another thing coming. Hal Wallace had lined up Norman Taurog and Michael Moore to direct a lightweight musical about an American soldier stationed in West Germany.
Probably if he hadn't been in the service, they wouldn't have done GI Blues with Elvis. It was be able to come back from the service and now be a part of GI Blues, I think was the whole idea.
Look, boy, the roof's caved in. Captain Hobart's on his way over here. He'll want to talk to you. What about? You're asking me what
I mean, it's a different kind of musical than the films he made previously. In King Creole, when he sings, he's a nightclub entertainer. There's a reason he's singing those songs. In Lovin' You, same thing. He's an entertainer. Now he's going to start making the kind of movie where you burst into song for really no apparent reason. You know, and you're wondering, where's the backup musicians? It's kind of signifying something to come, because pretty soon there'll be a formula for these type movies that he's going to make.
It's Elvis on a love campaign no guy or gal should miss.
Liebe. For those who do not understand, Liebe translated means love.
Oh, you don't have to explain that to a GI. That's one of the first words he learns when he gets over here.
Oh, you too, Tom.
The soundtrack album to GI Blues hit stores in October of 1960, quickly hitting #1 and remaining on the Billboard charts for a staggering 111 weeks. It would be the most successful album of Elvis's career.
Elvis is back.
He was fabulous. He was, when I was doing that particular movie with him, he was a complete teetotaler. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do anything, except have girlfriends, lots of girlfriends. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. And I remember, though, thinking at that time, it must be very hard to be him, because he couldn't go anywhere. I mean, he really couldn't. He had a suite up at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and he couldn't leave.
When the film opened the following month, it did huge business, ending up one of the top-grossing films of 1960. If Elvis had any worries about his post-Army popularity, the 1-2 punch of the GI Blues soundtrack and film immediately dispelled them. His worries about the quality of those films, however, remained undiminished. After the promising reviews for King Creole 2 years earlier, Elvis had been counting on more challenging, dramatic roles.
Movies that probably were offered to Marlon Brando, but Brando turned him down for whatever reason. Could have been offered to Elvis, but I don't think Hollywood even bothered offering him those movies because they knew he wasn't going to do it. He was going to do light musical comedies in a way, and that's what he was going to do, and that's what he did, and that's a tragedy.
In fact, his next film, Flaming Star, had been offered to Marlon Brando, who turned it down.
And this house and all in it will die. Barbara Eden.
It was a moody Western co-starring Barbara Eden in her pre-I Dream of Jeannie days.
He played an Indian in that film, and he was very concerned about what he was doing and whether he did it well, because he was conscious of the fact that he wasn't schooled in this particular facet of his profession, and he wanted to learn, and he was trying to learn. I thought he was great.
This is a little different. It was a little more serious. He took this a little more serious part, and he thought there wasn't going to be as many songs in it. He didn't think there was going to be any songs in it, really, at first, but then they added some songs to it.
With an eye toward lucrative soundtrack sales, the studio was eager to fill the picture with songs, including one that Elvis would have to sing on horseback.
Elvis actually had one of his rare temper tantrums on that set, because he didn't want to sing a song on horseback. And Don Siegel actually wound up getting some of those numbers out of the film. There's only a couple now.
Every man has a flaming star.
Unfortunately, Flaming Star generated little heat at the box office.
I'm part
Elvis's next picture was another drama, Wild in the Country, in which he played a would-be writer plagued by personal problems.
Elvis thought it was more of a serious role for him, you know, he got into it. I mean, he really tried, but you know, he still, again, he was not too thrilled with throwing a couple songs in. There was only, I think, 3 or 4 songs in that whole movie, but he wished there wouldn't have been any songs in it.
My knees are weak, my head is spinning around. I guess that love has turned me upside down. Thought I'd get hurt, but gee, it's turning out swell. I slipped, I stumbled, I fell.
Wild in the Country would be the last out-and-out drama Elvis Presley would make for nearly a decade. The message was clear. If the studio wanted to make lots of money, his movies needed lots of songs. 1961 would be a pivotal year in the motion picture career of Elvis Presley. He had recently signed a new 5-year contract with producer Hal Wallace. The first film under the new agreement was partially shot on location in the recently admitted 50th state, Blue Hawaii.
One of the best movies Elvis made and enjoyed making was definitely Blue Hawaii, because the locations we were on Kauai, and there's a hotel called the Cocoa Palms, which is no longer there. Every night after we were shooting, there was a place we'd go sit outside after dinner. Everybody ate together at night in those days. Every night we sat there and we'd ate with all the people, the crew. Well, most of it was crew people. And after that, you'd go sit in the bar, and Patti Page, the singer, was there because her husband, Charlie Kern, was the choreographer in the movie.
After dinner, he would go to his room, get his guitar, and some of his guys would get their instruments and come back down. And we would just sit around in the lounge there and sing. And that was fun.
Elvis would sit, play guitar, and sing songs all evening of the night. It was just something that was just unbelievable. It was like a movie scene in it, but it wasn't. It was just us having a good time. He felt great in it. And those are memories that I can remember that were just unbelievable, and he was so happy. And that was one of the happiest movies he ever made.
Patti Page had another connection to Blue Hawaii.
Elvis's cousin Lamar and I, who rode in this little canoe down the lagoon going into the wedding when they got married in Blue Hawaii. And they didn't have enough extras to do this. And so Lamar and I offered to do it. And I remember we didn't get paid either, so we weren't members of the extras union, so hope nobody catches me for it after all these years. But Lamar and I took a $1 bill, and we each took half of it. And he signed mine and I signed his. And I still have it.
Hawaii is, it's a new state. It's our new 50th state. There's a great deal of excitement, you know, over welcoming Hawaii to the U.S. What could be more commercial than sending Elvis Presley to Hawaii, putting him up against the lush tropical scenery, giving him an incredible bevy of beauties, including Joan Blackman. You know, they're really not his equal in many ways, but they're pretty, they're eye candy. It's got 14 songs, which means there's a soundtrack you can sell. It's got one song that's absolutely terrific, Can't Help Falling in Love, probably one of the greatest ballads Elvis ever did, which is going to give it lots of airplay, which is important. You know, they're going to be able to sell records at the same time. And a plot that is sort of cute. The plot isn't offensive, it doesn't threaten you, it's got a number of gags, it's got a little romance in it, non-threatening romance. You know, and pretty much you have the Elvis Presley formula. Blue Hawaii becomes the cookie cutter for the films to come.
Blue Hawaii opened in November of 1961 and went on to become the highest-grossing film of Elvis's career thus far.
The fastest-selling album in the nation, it's Elvis. RCA Victor presents the original soundtrack.
As with GI Blues, the Blue Hawaii soundtrack album was released a month before the film came out. It hit #1 on the Billboard charts and stayed there for an impressive 20 weeks. Even as his popularity soared, his albums sold, and his movies made a mint, Elvis's hopes of becoming a serious actor were drifting further and further beyond his grasp.
I told
Parker said, I don't know why you didn't let Elvis get some training. He could have had a major performer. I mean, he was a major personality, probably the greatest personality of certainly anybody that I ever saw, including the Beatles. He was one man, the Beatles are four. I mean, you got a different dynamic going, but I said no one was more personable than he was. I mean, he could really touch the public, be they old, young, middle-aged, it didn't make any difference. I said, I witnessed that. And he said, well, Bill, I thought it was better to put him in those things that he knew best.
I think the great shame here is that Elvis could have made 50 incredible movies that would have really highlighted what a good actor this guy was, working with the right people, working with the right directors. But it appeared like nobody really wanted him to do that. You know, they wanted him to dance on tables and have go-go girls behind him the whole time. I never really got that, never understood that. But you never miss the opportunity to see it. You know, King Creole was a great film. Jailhouse Rock was a great film. But I think as time went on, he wasn't really, maybe he wasn't into it so much. I don't know. But it came across like he wasn't really into it.